Civilian oversight of police takes root in Somerville, and little free libraries engage readers during COVID. Welcome to this second episode of the Weekly Wire, our new audio roundup of highlights from this week's articles in the Somerville Wire news service. I'm your host, John Loftus. You can find the full text versions of those headlines and other Somerville Wire stories 24/7 at somervillewire.news. That's Somerville Wire, all one word, .news. Our first segment this week is about the civilian oversight of police. In the wake of social unrest around the killings of people such as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police, Somerville is working to reimagine public safety in the city. Part of this endeavor will be to create a civilian oversight agency that will have the power to keep entities like police in check and investigate injustices. R. Mason, recently hired as the city's public outreach coordinator, speaks to how mistrust has manifested itself in Somerville, particularly in undocumented communities.
As someone who's doing public outreach, I really try to stress, just how often I'm saying this lately, is just how important in-reach is. So when oversight was first brought to me, specifically here in Somerville, there are many things that I felt go into civilian oversight. It was just like, well, what led to the mistrust of the police department? What these relationships being where they are today? Think specifically of our undocumented community, as unsafe as they are to call 911 in general, feeling of being unsafe in Somerville when it just comes to going or accessing the food banks and the food pantries, or, our COVID vaccine informations, or anywhere to anything regarding any type of access right now that could have a police presence anywhere, already is working against the process of civilian oversight or the engagement of residents. Because first we have to address food insecurity. Well, just from my vantage point, it's just like, how did we define equity and racial justice and all that jazz? So there are many things that we, or in my approach to civilian oversight, trying to get to this legislation means that we have to have a conversation on other factors that lead to where we are.
In this next clip, Aram Decina, the city's legislative and policy analyst, addresses how a civilian oversight agency could play a role in monitoring the police and allowing the community to help regulate power.
Just generally speaking, about distrust of police, this, it's not a new topic. So I think just, the idea of making sure that an entity that has a lot of power is checked and investigated should misconduct occur. I think people just generally want that. It shouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, I don't think. But it's just, when you have people who are armed, who do patrol the streets and who have the responsibility and the authority to keep the peace, so to speak, the community wants to be able to have a say in their policies or the way they behave or the way they're treating the community they serve. So as far as, the distrust of Somerville residents and against the Somerville Police Department officers, it seems to just stem from that idea that, it's just keeping an eye sort of on power.
For our final segment, we spoke with Matthew Kennedy, one of the founding members of Defund SPD. He said he feels skeptical about the amount of influence a civilian oversight board would have. But if one is established, he hopes that those on the board would be elected, that they would not have a conflict of interest, and that they would be paid. Here, he describes a system that he envisioned, where the root causes of crime would be addressed through social services, making the need for policing less vital.
Rather than having police, arrest people for having drug addictions, we could instead treat that like a health problem. So we could have, people who are, professionals on, addiction, have them, treat their health. Gangs, rather than have cops, criminalize people for being in gangs, we instead have youth workers talk to the people who are in those communities, figure out why they're joining to begin with, and then, hopefully divert them from there much sooner. For homelessness, again, like I want more money put towards housing, because that's the root of a lot of crimes that pop up. So when I talk about like not having a role with police anymore, a lot of the issues that we are currently call cops for, even like the quote unquote legitimate ones, like the violent stuff, they just wouldn't be happening to begin with. So we're talking about a world where there's no more profit, where there's no more private property. Like that's when you can get to a point when there's no more police. So it's kind of tied up in like larger systems as well.
And on to announcements. This week, the Somerville Arts Council will be creating an art installation along the Great River Road, facing the Mystic River and the Orange Line. They're looking for one artist to create and manage the project, called We Are Somerville. For more information and to apply, visit somervilleartscouncil.org. And that's going to do it for the April 9th, 2021 edition of the Weekly Wire. Please tune in again next Friday for our next edition. The Somerville Wire and the Weekly Wire are a production of the Somerville News Garden project at the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. Email us with tips, comments, corrections, any Somerville events and announcement listings that you would love to hear at bingeonline.org. That's BINJ online.org. Have a wonderful week, Somerville.